do you think the Americans know, or NATO, do you think that they know what those triggers are that will actually push Russia to the war?
So we do and we don't. Here's how we do, with a pretty good level of confidence. We do know because, like I said, we war gamed it. Our intelligence capabilities are very, very sophisticated and robust. We have a lot of intelligence on Russia. Now, red lines is something that is very difficult to make an assessment with high confidence with, because it could be changing throughout the war, right? They could be making different decisions. Now, we have a pretty good idea, but the problem is, Kim, is that many people in the US national security apparatus simply don't believe it, including, like, let's say Lindsey Graham. He continuously says things like Putin cannot remain, in power, and others have said that. Now, Putin takes that at face value. The Russians do believe that we actually have a regime change planned for Russia, similar to
Okay.
what happened in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria. There are two events that had a deep psychological impact on Putin, and that is the death of Muammar Gaddafi. He was hung, these pictures with his tongue hanging out. He basically died at the hands of his own people. And Saddam Hussein, when he was hurled up in that, when the US forces found him, he was in the ground, basically. And so that told Putin, regime change is America's standard playbook. They are coming next for me, because that's what we say. That's what people
Right.
like Lindsey Graham actually say. So they are prepared for that. And so that is why they developed this counter plan. In
Yes.
their view, it's a defensive plan. They're not planning to attack the United States out of the blue. That is not what Putin, planned for. They will, however, if there's an incoming, on a strategic target to Moscow, either from Ukraine or from wherever, Putin will attack a NATO country and will attack non-kinetically the United States. By non-kinetically, I mean crippling cyber attacks. Depending on how the Russians assess where do these missiles, who provided these missiles, where do they come from, who actually pushed the button. Because remember, Ukrainians are not trained. These Patriot missile systems are so highly sophisticated. What happens is, technically a Ukrainian soldier pushes the button, so to speak. I'm simplifying it a little bit, but it has a whole team of NATO personnel actually operating this system.
Mm.
And so depending on how the Russians assess, and that's why they're watching all of these, and they're testing, like, who is doing what, and how do you justify, like, a counter attack. So that is all algorithmically being right now tested out and programmed to give it some sort of justification from the Russian standpoint.
Yeah.
They want to be
Okay.
able to say, you are asking for it. We told you don't do that. You keep doing it. We told you what's going to happen. Here you go. That's how they
Okay.
think.
In your assessment, and you've been brilliant about this. I mean, you've been really one of the only people that's been right about everything,
Thank you.
really, when it comes to Russia. Um, what do you give us your, like, percentage that you think we're actually going to end up in a hot war? I mean, I think what I worry, and what you kind of sound like you're saying, is similar to World War One. It sounds like we're sleepwalking into war.
Yes.
And what happened with World War One was that both sides, Germany and Russia, kind of thought they could manage each other's, they thought they could kind of manage each other in the escalation. And there was a thought that they kind of knew what the other one was going to do and whatnot, right? And ultimately, there was a miscalculation on Russia's part, really, or maybe not. I mean, there's debates about this, whether or not Russia knew that if they enacted a mobilization, which they did, that it would trigger Germany to just full-fledged go into preemptive war, which then Germany declared war on Russia. And then what people didn't realize, maybe that was in Germany's playbook, was that they would immediately then attack France, which is what they did. And that was what people weren't really, that was, well, like I said, there's a historical debate on whether or not that was really a surprise. Did people know? Did they not know that that was in their playbook? So it seems, and like we're talking about here, we don't fully know exactly what's in Putin's playbook, even though, I mean, you've been, like I said, the most accurate. So, which is why you wrote the book on it. But we don't really fully know what the triggers are where he's got it in his mind of, if this happens and this happens and this happens and this happens, it's war, right? We don't know exactly the buttons. You would hope the Pentagon knows, because you would
No, they
hope that they
don't.
wouldn't trigger them.
No,
But
they
that's the
don't.
problem. Like, okay, so they don't.
No,
They
they
don't know.
don't.
So we're potentially sleepwalking into this war. What do you put the chances are that we actually end up? It's been 75 years or however long of a Cold War at this point. I mean, are we going to end up in a hot war? Where do you place your bets?
Okay, let me give you a little bit of a context first before I make that, it's a very difficult assessment, right? So I want to nuance what I said previously, that we do know and we don't know. On the one hand, we know, like, at the broader level, but as you said, like, correctly, to the level of granularity that we need to know, we don't know. And the reason is because the Russians do it. There's a whole algorithm, there's a whole system, right? And that's not how we do threat assessment, the Pentagon, but that's how the Russians do it. Everything that is called an indication and warning, right? Our increasing the scope and scale of weapons that we provide to them, from non-lethal to lethal, right? Everything that we say, and by we, I mean senior leaders, right? Not some like janitor in the Pentagon, but if Lloyd Austin says we are wanting to defeat Russia, to degrade Russian military capability, they believe it. That statement is going
Right.
into that database. When President Trump said a few weeks ago that actually he said something that completely terrified me, and I knew that Trump didn't mean it that way, but the Russians interpreted it that way. He said something like, bad things are going to happen to Russia. Remember? He said that,
Yeah.
it prompted me actually to place a call to one of the people that I knew who has access to him. And I said, dude, please, I know President Trump did not mean that, but here's how Putin is going to interpret it. And then the very next day, and I don't know if it made a difference, but the next day, President Trump toned it down. So all of these statements, weapon systems that we send in training, all of that goes into the database, and algorithmically, the system spits out levels of threat. Okay, and it's very similar to how we do. I'm actually giving you very detailed information here, so your readers are very lucky. I don't give it to everybody. So spits out the level of threat. It's similar to how we do our insurance, let's say car insurance, how they
Right.
assess.
Okay.
No, yes, like
Yeah.
if like a 20-year-old is driving a red Corvette, his
Right.
insurance is going to be much higher than a 70-year-old lady driving a Buick, right? And so the
Right.
Russians assess that we, the United States, are already a high-risk actor. And so once that algorithm spits out the threat level, then a human goes in and says, this is what it means. And then it's presented to Putin, and then Putin makes the final decision, right? And that's why
Okay.
Putin said, he said, I just can't simply allow that level of proximity. It doesn't give me enough decision space. And so we don't have that level of information because we don't even have there's a lot of, we don't have, believe it or not, in the intelligence community, we don't have expertise required to identify that algorithm-driven software. And so, yes, we have an idea. On top of it, most people, because they are not versed in intelligence business, some commanders just don't believe it, and and especially the people like Lindsey Graham, they just say all of it is BS, and that's how we will walk into this war. And I am really struggling to identify. Clearly, I wrote a book about it, so I do believe that it's pretty probable, not only plausible but probable. But I apologize, but I am not going to place a numerical number on it because I don't want people freaking out. Because what I don't want to happen is it's going to get out of control and they'll say, Koffler said this. And because I have a very strong, as you said, record of accurately predicting what Putin
Yeah.
is and is not going to do. And so what I don't want to happen is I don't want for it to become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Okay.
Here's how it can happen. You gave a very good example with World War I. We had something similar in 1983 that we almost got into war with the Russians. But people don't know it because it was classified. It recently was declassified. What I'm about to tell you, it's even was scarier than the Cuban Missile Crisis. People just don't know it because the government, obviously for obvious reason, tried to conceal it, not to freak people out. So in 1983, NATO and the United States led NATO to conduct a military exercise called the Able Archer in Europe. And we were supposed to simulate a nuclear strike. The tensions between Russia and the USSR at that point were extremely high already. So the exercise was supposed to happen in November 1st, 1983, just a few months before, I believe in April, if I remember correctly. The Russians shot down, if you remember, a Korean commercial airline, KAL-007, killing on board a lot of there just happened to be a lot of U.S. Intelligence officers on board and a U.S. congressman, I believe from Georgia. Why did they do that? Because they thought that this was a military aircraft intruding on their space because previously the U.S. was conducted naval simulation bomb runnings, reaching just like what Russia is doing right now. That's what we were doing to Russia. And at that point, Ronald Reagan had very, very strong rhetoric against Russia. So again, that system that I described, and at that point it was less sophisticated, but they identified the threat and they shot it down. So when the Russians knew, and they shot it down because Andropov, the Secretary General, had a standing order to the prior authorization. And that's what a lot of the people in the intelligence business even don't understand, because they said, when Putin placed those nuclear forces in a special combat regime, a lot of analysts were like, there's no such thing, combat regime. And I'm like, well, you can only see indications and warnings that U.S. intelligence observes, that a lot of unobservables. You're not going to know a standing order, which is what happened then. When the Russians heard about the Able Archer, they went into convulsions because we were supposed to practice a nuclear drill, right? And they thought this is a cover. This is a cover because a lot of the time that's how they do it. How did Ukraine invasion start? The Russians assembled under the cover of a military exercise 190,000 troops all but encircling Ukraine. So the Russians thought we are about to go nuclear on them. What did they do? They placed their what is called the National Command Authority in the bunkers, expecting that nuclear strike. Fortunately, we, the United States intelligence, did not get that. I mean, we had it in the system, but we did not process it. Fortunately, the reason I'm saying fortunately, because if we knew they're going to do that, we would have thought, we would have concluded that Russia is about to attack us, and we would have attacked first. And that's how these things work. And that's why in my book, I said there's the way that it's going to happen, if it's going to happen, is this. So there's a saying in one of the books by the founder of the thought leader behind the whole wargaming theory. And he said, listen very carefully. He thinking that I was about to kill him in self-defense was going to kill me in self-defense. So I had to kill him in self-defense. Get that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
how it's going to happen. And I'm not going to place a numerical number on the probability because people are going to dissect it because, you know, that's how hedge fund managers like do the stock market, you know, play like if you say this number, you know, people are gonna dissect it, and I
Sure.
don't want anyone reading into it and freaking out and having it become
Yeah.
a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Well, I agree with you that nobody wants this war. I don't think Russia or the United States or NATO wants a
No.
war with each other. So it's not like anybody wants to get aggressive with one another. It's just that you're right. It would be a matter of, well, I thought they were going to kill me, so I had to kill them first. You know, it's like
Yep,
everybody's operating under self-defense, thinking, well, it's either me or them, you know, at this moment.
exactly.
And everybody thinks they're operating in self-defense when in reality, well, I mean, they escalated themselves to that point, right? It escalated to that point, and not being able to read the signs, and also just not knowing exactly what the other country's actual plan is. I mean, we're not privy to the actual plan. And so one wrong move and suddenly, just like World War One, you know, if you're on the side of the historians who believe Russia had no idea what Germany's war plan was when they mobilized against Austria-Hungary, and then Germany was like, wait a minute, that's an attack, you know, that's threatening to us, and we got to declare war, because that's how exactly Germany felt like, wait, we have to operate in self-defense, right? Because now Russians are coming. You know, and if you believe that Russia had no idea what Germany's actual war plan was, and that was a good example of how they sleptwalked into that war. One
Yeah,
wrong move, it was Russia mobilizing. Suddenly, the next thing you know, Germany's like, well, then we're at war. I mean, that's what that means. And maybe Russia didn't mean that at all, but Germany was like, that's how we interpret this, and that's why this is
yeah,
war. And now we're going to go get the Frenchies, right? And so, you know, and that was like, and then what should have just been a war that was very localized ended up being you know, world war, ended up being world war. And that sounds like that's where we're, how the same sort of thing. It's this,
yeah,
well, we're going to have to operate in self-defense. And that's very frightening. That's actually more frightening, I think, than any other type of, because any other type of war, you could kind of say, okay, well, we know what your intentions are. We know what you're trying to do. And so we need to solve that problem. And maybe we could actually solve that problem. But when both sides are just operating out of fear, I mean, how do you solve that problem? I mean, you have to de-escalate.
you're exactly correct. And one more I will add to your assessment, while more nuanced, that makes it even more dangerous, is the personalities. We have two high-strung personalities. We have Putin and we have Trump. And in some sense, they're
Yeah,
different. Trump is like very, you know, what I call it. He kind of gets emotional, right? Like he
right.
with
Yeah, he's
his tweets,
mercurial, as
right?
they say. Yeah,
Okay, Putin is very reserved, but believe me, inside he is boiling because neither one wants to lose. They both want.
mhm,
I used to be winners, and so neither one right now wants to de-escalate. I mean, Putin doesn't want to de-escalate for two reasons. The first reason I explained, he can't afford that level of threat in Russia's assessment on its doorstep. But the second reason is ego. For
yeah,
us, for us, it is mostly ego.
Mhm.
right? What other reason do we have? For the life of me, I don't understand. Ukraine is not part of America's vital interests. What is a vital interest? Our long-term stability and security is in no shape or form dependent on Ukraine, is it?
Right.
Uh,
Right.
and yet we continue arming
Yeah.
Ukraine, either out of ego or because we believe the Europeans that who say, "Oh, Putin is going to attack the next country," which is not true. Putin is not going to attack a NATO country because he does not want war with NATO.
Yeah.
He doesn't because he knows it's going to go nuclear, and he doesn't want to go nuclear because there will be no winners. But he
Right.
will, if there's imminent threat, he's prepared to do so, and that's why he practices regularly pushing that button. The Russians just conducted strategic level military exercises called Zapad, right? Where Putin, again, they simulated a nuclear strike. I have an article, by the way, in the British Telegraph that describes exactly what we've been talking about right now, Kim, is how we sleepwalk into that war. And I describe why exactly they practice pressing the nuclear button. It's because during the Cold War, Brezhnev, remember the dude with the with the thick eyebrows, he
Mhm.
was so paranoid, talking about personalities. I'm explaining the difference between like why we're right now, you and I both agree that we are at a higher threat level than in previous situation. And so it's personalities, we got Trump and we got Putin. Brezhnev was so paranoid when when the Russian military was doing nuclear simulation strikes, and he was supposed to press the button, he was trembling, and he kept asking his defense minister Grechko, "Are you sure this is an exercise?" So the Russian, apparatus made a requirement that first, they're going to elect the president that actually is more like Putin than like Brezhnev, right? And
Yeah.
they're going to practice it regularly.
Mhm. I want to ask you about some other things some claims that Trump has made about Russia recently, the economy. And I would imagine you still have family and friends and speak to many people in Russia, would be my guess.
I'm
Or
not
do you not?
answering that. I'm not.
Oh, okay.
I'm targeted left and right by
Okay.
both Russians and Ukrainians. I don't want anybody to be targeted over there.
Okay. Well, tell us,
So,
what do you know
but
about the
I
economy?
know I know about Russian economy. Yes,
So the
Russian
claim is that
economy.
they're doing worse than they claim, that there's long gas lines, that it's a really, really tough economy. What is your take on that?
The economy is tough, and the Russians are actually not hiding it at all. The Russians have acknowledged that they are in the economic downturn compared to what they were before. So they were on a wartime footing. The economy was going really well. So they do acknowledge the economic downturn. They slashed their forecast for 2025 from 2.5% to 1.5% growth, right? There's inflation about 6%. Putin is working with Putin himself is an economist. He has a very strong team. His central banker is Elvira Nabiulna, who is actually MIT trained in the United States, very highly respected. And so far, the economy held up pretty good. But they gave a warning. Putin gave a warning to his business people, saying, "We are going to be in a tough spot." Does that mean Russia is not going to be able to continue this war? Absolutely not. They will, because they have been on a wartime footing since 2015. And so they have pumped out sufficient amount of military hardware to continue for several years. That's thing
Mhm.
number one. Number two, the Russians, compared to Europeans and Americans, they have such higher tolerance for any kind of economic, discomfort, shortages. I mean, we lived through socialism. I mean, so Putin has the flexibility with the budget to change things up and to maintain the level of defense spending that he needs to continue the war. When it comes to security, security trumps economic concerns. And then finally, if you look at historically, and again, I am really surprised. I don't know who is advising President Trump. I'll just give you some numbers here. The United States had recession between 2007 and 2009, right? And yet we spent, let me pull up, I did like research today. We continued all of these wars, right? We spent billions. I think, if I am correct, about 400, okay, between 2007 and 2009, the United States spent approximately between 440 to 450 billions on foreign wars, and we were in a recession. We spent trillions, right, between Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, and spent 20 years, as you know, in Afghanistan.
Right.
5 to 6 trillions on all these wars. What are they talking about? It's going to make, and those were not even existential threats for us, those foreign wars, right? Mm-hmm. What are they talking about? This is an existential threat. I am dumbfounded, like the things that come out. And I like President Trump. I'm a Trump supporter. I love what he's doing domestically, but I am dumbfounded what is coming out of the Pentagon, out of the White House, in terms of like they're thinking, oh, secondary sanctions are going to make Russia stop. Well, first of all, there's nothing. I'm probably answering your second question right now, if I may, but no, they won't, because there's nothing to sanction. The trade between U.S. and Russia is 3.5 billion. 3 billion is we import from them things that we actually need, fertilizers, precious metals like platinum, and certain chemicals that we absolutely need. We only export, some stuff. It's ridiculous. So you're going to have to sanction India and China, and both of them already said we're going to continue buying Russia's oil because they have their own national security interest and economic interest. They're not all of a sudden going to do what we tell them to do just because we say so. They have their own, agenda, obviously. Mm-hmm. You understand? Like counter, like give me your opinion, counter what I just said. Like I'm so pleased to have this conversation with you because I'm no longer invited on legacy media, right? The Fox News and all that, because they don't want to hear. They kept saying all these General Keane and all these people who are actually on the board of military industrial complex keep saying, oh, the victory is right around the corner. Just give more weapons to Ukraine. Right. And I'm like, for almost 4 years, I said, there's no military path to victory for Ukraine. And yet they keep saying it. So I can't argue. And I invited General Keane or any of those generals actually to debate me. Like, so what is the counter argument to what I just said to you? Like pretend if you were in the White House and one of those people who said, oh, it's going to force secondary sanctions, are going to force Putin to end the war. How? Explain to me how. What is the rationale?
Right. Yeah, I think they think that it's going to collapse, that the economy is going to be so bad. I think what they're thinking is that they could just reenact the fall of the USSR. I think that's what they're really thinking. That if they just make things so bad economically for Russia, that it will cause Russia to have to just collapse militarily, essentially, and focus on its people.
Well, that's just not going to happen this time. Because, you're going to need a lot more time, and you're going to need cooperation from many, many more people countries rather, and they're not going to cooperate because because China, like I said, China loves this war going on because for China, and is another thing that most people don't know. Russia and China are not the strategic allies that they want us to believe they are. They are actually
Yeah.
uh, long-term adversaries, and they believe that eventually they might go to war with each other because of the long border, right? And so China is loving the fact that two of its top adversaries, the United States and Russia, are expanding our military arsenal, our weapons arsenal, our stockpile of artillery shells, every type of munition, and loving it just before they're going to invade Taiwan. The Chinese are not going to let the Russians end this war because they want us at the bare minimum before they go into the Taiwan. And for the life of me, I don't get it how the Pentagon is not understanding it. That we think we're so clever, but really we are weakening Russia as China is weakening us
Yeah.
militarily.
So basically, it sounds like there is no, like you said, there's no military win for Ukraine. So why we keep doing this, um, and we keep doing it because we don't want to cave completely to Putin. I mean, that's Trump does have a big
Yeah,
ego, and so he doesn't want to lose anything to Putin at all. Doesn't want to give up doesn't want to make a single concession. Wants to make some concessions, but wants it to be even, right? Wants it to be like, okay, you give up half, I give up half. But Putin sounds like he's saying, I don't have to give up half. You
no,
have to
he
give up
doesn't.
everything.
He
So
doesn't.
he's right. So it sounds like Putin's kind of giving the big FU to the United States and NATO and saying, "Oh, you guys,
Correct.
you're trying to get me to agree to something I don't need to agree to. So we're just going to keep this going until you guys realize that." It sounds like is kind of what Russia's saying.
Exactly.
The
And
question is,
the reason is we did not do our homework. We knew. I personally briefed NATO in September 2013, just months before Putin's invasion of Crimea. I laid out at the classified level his strategy,
yeah,
and the Europeans basically did nothing. They didn't want to develop a counter strategy, right? They wanted to continue drinking their cappuccinos and, going to Monaco. And neither did the Pentagon, by the way. And the counter
hmm
strategy that should have been developed is a similar, like, five-pronged strategy, just like what I wrote, the Putin's playbook. We should have had a counter playbook, and we didn't bother to develop it because for whatever reason it's too hard. We don't have enough intellectual firepower. I don't know what the reason is. They have all of these generals. I hope that when he invites these generals next week, as he fires 90% of them, because they keep fighting this wars they can't win. They couldn't win in Afghanistan. We ran away.
yeah,
After 20 years, $2.2 trillion, 6,000 American lives. We left $85 billion of top secret equipment. Afghanistan did not even have a regular standing army to speak of. They
right.
have these people fighting with towels on their heads, and they think they're going to beat Russia. Are you freaking kidding me? So I don't
That's what I
know.
found
I don't know.
comical about Trump's paper tiger comment when he said,
Yeah,
well, a real army would have defeated them in 3 days. And it's like, we couldn't even beat Afghanistan. I mean,
yeah.
we fought that war for 20 years against, like you said, it wasn't even a standing army. And we couldn't, when was the last time we won a war? I mean, we have not been able to win a war. And so, I don't know what he's talking about with that, but I think it is a good question. And the last question I want to ask you is why hasn't Putin just taken Ukraine? I mean, like to what Trump is saying, why
I'll
why
tell
is
you why.
Russia? Yeah, why is it a war of attrition rather than just go in and take the place?
Here's why. I actually get asked that question a lot, and unfortunately, when I go to legacy networks, they give me like 30 seconds to explain something I wrote a book about. So here's why. The strategy is deliberate. The idea is not to own Ukraine, not to, like, destroy and just own Ukraine and have it be part of Russia. Because right now, because Ukraine is economically is a basket case. What Putin wants to do, he wants to gradually remove the warfighting capability from the territory of Ukraine. He wants to have election and to have a pro-Russian government. He does not want to own Ukraine. Now, the second reason is because he's uncertain if he went in and started bombing the hell out of Ukrainian military command and control centers and like the actual government, the parliament, and Zelensky. He's uncertain how we would react and if we would not initiate a war. And so the strategy is called fighting below the threshold of a kinetic response by NATO. It is deliberately going methodically to places that he needs first, which is eastern Ukraine, which is the Donbass, which is why they annexed it first, in still pro-Russian government. He wants to make it so that that country is livable, right? And so that people are governed by pro-Russian government, and there are certain people, the majority of the people in eastern Ukraine, they're Russian-speaking anyway, and so he wants that gradual removal of Western influence and NATO's warfighting capabilities, and that is why that is going on. But also, besides, the Russians, that's how they fight, right? The Russians are never going to fight like Americans because they don't care, because the way that US fight is it's a cultural thing. We minimize casualties. We do precision strike, because like the minute we accidentally, strike civilian target, oh my God, the next day it's like CNN screams how bad US military, how evil US military is, right? The Russians don't care about it. This is how they historically have fought. It's a war of attrition. That's just how they do business. They feel that's their MO.
And he doesn't seem to care when people are like, oh, you're losing the war because you're not, look at, you've made no gains.
He doesn't, because he knows that he's not losing the war. He knows that he's not losing the war. He knows that it's just going to take. So let's say if we didn't intervene, meaning if we did not support Ukraine, probably would have finished in about 6 to 9 months. Now, if we continue supporting, probably it'll take about a year and a half or two for them to be done removing all those capabilities with that, because he's also careful, because we have people there, right? We have that combat training center in Yavoriv. He doesn't just want to place an Oreshnik on us because he's uncertain how we're going to react. He doesn't want to trip power wires. So, but he wants to signal to, and they keep telling us, you deploy your forces, you're going to be legitimate target. So technically, we're right now we're not a direct combatant, right? We are a stakeholder in the conflict, but we're not supposedly fighting. Although we have CIA officers there, we have we have National Guard there from Florida. We have National Guard there, but we're not technically fighting. The minute we become an actual combatant, we are on the target list. So it's a very tough situation, and it's going to be very difficult for us to untangle it, because they placed Trump in this position by Joe Biden. It is my assessment deliberately authorized the deliveries of strategic systems to Russia, which they used to strike Moscow, to set up Trump, because Biden changed his posture. Remember, he was saying nuclear Armageddon is a real thing, and that's why I'm not going to go to war with Russia. And yet, all of a sudden, he flipped because he wanted Trump to be stuck with this conflict, with this unwinnable conflict.
Well, and that's what Putin has in his favor, I suppose, is the fact that, right now he's dealing with a mercurial Trump who changes his mind, but soon he'll have a different president. And before Trump, he had a different president. And before that president, there was a different president. Before that president, he's dealt with so many different presidents, which is why I think, like you said, the US fights wars differently than Russia does. Russia does wars of attrition because they have the time. The United States doesn't have that kind of time because we're constantly in an election cycle. And the next guy wants to do something different or say he's going to change the strategy, or we got to get this war over with quick before my term ends or before I start. We've got a lot of electoral motivation to like get in and get out is kind of the thinking, even though we stay in forever. Nonetheless, but to kind of strike the way we do or to do things the way we do, it's because our politicians are dealing with politics and not with actual warfare. Whereas Russia and even China, which they're not in war, but they have the benefit of leaders that are just there for a long time and able to play this out over a long period of time. So they can think longer term in their strategies rather than quick, we got to get this over with before the midterms. Because we got an election in 2 years. Every 2 years we got an election. So that really does change the calculus. And it also, I think, makes it difficult for a country like Russia to kind of figure out, well, what is the United States going to do? Because although he said even before, and he was right, he's like, Trump, Kamala, what's the difference? You guys all do the same thing every time, right? Like you all.
That is true.
It's
that is true. When it comes to Russia policy, it has been very consistent. This Obama, George Bush, it always has been anti-Russia. Is assessed by
right.
the Russians. It's always like we are trying to make sure that Ukraine. I mean, we have absorbed the Baltics. Then we kept going after Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova. We try, and the Russians view it as us encroaching into their strategic security perimeter. So that policy is very consistent. It doesn't really matter to them. They do psychological profiles of every U.S. leader, right? They did one with Biden, they did one on Kamala. Of course, they do one on Trump. So, but
he's right. Yeah. Nothing changed. I mean, nothing changed. As much as Trump said things would change, nothing's changed. Nothing's
exactly.
changed.
And that is another insight that is very crucial for Putin, that initially Putin thought, because of what Trump said before he became president second time, no more foreign wars. I'm not going to spend U.S. taxpayers' money on equipping foreign militaries anymore. And then he did a 180, right? He renewed the weapons deliveries and all. And so Putin is looking at it and thinking, okay, well, if Trump could not change that policy, it must be like either the deep state that is manipulating him, or Trump was all along did not want to be friends with Russia. Putin does not trust Trump. He doesn't believe that Trump actually, at this point, having changed the posture 180, Putin really does not believe that that Trump wants to be like a partner with Russia. He thinks that Trump is lying, that he wants a peace deal for the sake of peace. Putin right now believes that we will use that ceasefire and peace plan to rearm Ukraine, to deploy additional military hardware in Russia's strategic security perimeter, because that has been our playbook for like quarter of a century, right? So now he doesn't believe it anymore. So and that's another reason why the peace plan is simply unachievable. And I've been saying it for like 3 years at this point, and it keeps out 4 years, and it's been going. And fortunately, hopefully God will protect us from an actual, war, because there's going to be no winners if we and the Russians, if we go against each other. Man, there's a reason Pentagon considers Russia a near-peer competitor. With all that talk that Russia's a paper tiger, why do you consider? I briefed Space Forces last summer. Russia and China are strategic competitors. That's why they invited me. They still, I gave 2 days worth of briefings to all sorts of, including senior leaders on Putin's thinking and Russia's warfighting strategy.
Yeah.
So,
Well, Rebecca, unfortunately, I should say, unfortunately, you've been right.
I know,
Unfortunately.
unfortunately, I hope I'm wrong about my prediction. That I hope I'm wrong on the big one. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, I hope you are too, but you've been right this whole time. So, even though when people haven't wanted to listen to you, you've been right. Really appreciate your time here. Appreciate you being on the show. We do have the link down below. I think now is an important time more than ever to read the book, Putin's Playbook. We have the link down below. It's probably really an important time to really figure out where we're headed and how our leaders are going to take us there. Rebecca Koffler, we do have the link, like I said, to the book and also to follow you on X. So really, really appreciate. Is there anywhere else that you want people to go?
I'm pretty much on all social media on X, Getter, True Social, Rumble, YouTube, Facebook, you name it. Rebecca
Okay.
is spelled REBEKAH at 0132. 0132 is a code for an intelligence officer in the USGS system.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Really appreciate your time.
Of course. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson Show, which you can catch Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. It is free for you to watch. Again, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, KimIversonShow.com. See you there.